I'm going back to the roots of this channel to find out if I can make a 1 gallon test batch on the Anvil Foundry. Let's find out right now. Welcome to Big Monster Brewing. I am Matt, and in this video, I'm going to see if I can make a successful 1 gallon test batch on my Anvil Foundry. But before we get started with that, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel, hitting the notification bell, sharing, liking the video, all of the YouTube things that I still haven't written down and need to put on a post-it and right under my camera so I don't forget what they are. The 1 gallon batch. So, the reason I'm doing this is when I started this channel about 2 years ago, I started making 1 gallon batches to learn different styles. A lot of styles of beer that I wasn't familiar with, that I didn't know the particular malts or hops that went into getting the flavor profiles that the BJCP would tell you you should be finding or had listed in their description of each beer. So instead of making 5 gallon experimental batches over and over again, I had put together some equipment between an old water cooler and my brew in the bags, kind of made a mash in the cooler system in a sense, and then straight up boiled the wort from that. Now, I'm not going to have the discussion in this video of whether you would or you should make a 1 gallon batch, because there is the eternal argument saying if you're going to do all grain brewing, why take all that time to make such little beer? Just go ahead and do X amount of beer. I'm not here to argue that. I am here to see if we can make a 1 gallon batch. This is another experiment. That's what this video is about. And now that I have the Anvil Foundry and I absolutely love making beer on it, can I make it on the Foundry as opposed to the old system I had done before? That's the question I kind of posed to myself on a day where I had literally nothing planned to do and decided to find out if that was possible. The first thing I had to do for this experiment was build a new profile in Beersmith. I wanted some kind of numbers to work with. They might not be exactly right, but I needed some kind of a goal, I guess, in a sense, to see if everything was working the way I expected, or if not, what I needed to change. So in my profiles in Beersmith, I did make a 1 gallon batch profile for my 6.5 gallon Anvil Foundry, and this is going to be no sparge. And the changes I made were specifically to the batch volume, the fermenter loss, and then the ending volume, taking into consideration the trub and yeast that I leave behind in the 1 gallon fermenters that I use for these. I also changed the boil off rate just a bit. When I run at 120 volts, I have this about at 0.3 to 0.35, depending on how big the volume is going to be. I'm thinking with this starting off with such a small amount of water and it being less amount of water that those heating elements need to boil, we're going to get more boil off rate in this sense. Other than that, that's about all I'm doing to get started to see what kind of numbers I have once I get to brewing. This is the profile I use to build my recipe, and it starts off with saying I need 1.96 gallons of water. I went ahead and rounded that up and just put 2 gallons of water into the Foundry to start off with. Now, before I turn everything on, I do add the malt pipe and take a look at the water level, and I'm a little concerned that the water might be too shallow for the grains, but we'll keep going to find out. I power on the Foundry and I set the mash temperature to 152, and then I start the water circulation. Now that I've officially started my brew day, I start a timer to find out how long this whole process is going to take. With the water heating up, I add my brewing salts to get them well dissolved for when it's time to mash in. Now on to the recipe for this test batch, and I decided to make a pale ale because it's a good amount of both malts and hops to get an idea of what the Foundry can do with this low of a volume. And to start off the recipe, I have 89% of a pale malt base. To that, I add 9% 20L caramel malt, and to round it all out, I add 2% of 70-80L caramel malt. When the water gets up to temperature, I mash in, and I'm still concerned about that water level as I stir. But I keep going, and I set up the recirculation plate to get that water flowing through the entire grain bed. While the mash rest is recirculating, I get my boil additions ready, and I start off with a pretty standard bittering hop for my beers, and that is 28 IBUs of Magnum at 60 minutes. For the flavor and aroma hops, I am going to stick to a single hop. It's one that I don't know much about, but I would like to learn more of what it brings to a beer, and that's going to be Vic Secret hops. And I start with adding 10 IBUs of Vic Secret at 10 minutes, then another 5 IBUs at 5 minutes, and then a final charge of 0.1 ounce at flame out. And along with all that, I add my usual, albeit reduced additions of yeast nutrients at 10 minutes and Whirlfloc at 2 minutes. With such a small amount of grains, I'm thinking 45 minutes is probably a long enough mash rest to get conversion. But to double check, I do pull a small sample and do the iodine test, and the iodine doesn't turn purple or black, so everything looks good. So I go ahead and pull the malt pipe out and let it drain into the foundry. From here, I take a pre-boil gravity reading, and I'm shooting for 1.040, but it's really high at 1.047. So now I check that pre-boil volume, and I'm looking for 1.75 gallons, but I actually have only 1.5 gallons. I'm thinking at this point the numbers are wrong somewhere in that new profile I created. I forgot to update something. Most likely, I guess in the grain absorption, because that's the only thing we've done so far. But to make up for the volume, I go ahead and add a quart of RO water directly into the foundry. And after I stir up all the sweet wort and take another pre-boil gravity reading, I'm now at 1.040 on the nose. So that boil volume number seems to be correct for Beersmith, at least in regards to the pre-boil gravity. We'll find out after the boil in terms of what we get in our fermenter and what our starting gravity ends up being. So now that I have the amount of sweet wort that I need to continue, I put the foundry into boil mode. At the 15-minute mark, I add the immersion chiller to the foundry, and I can already see that chilling this down is going to be a challenge because only the very last loop of that coil is submerged, and it is barely submerged at that. I do chill the wort with the immersion chiller, and it takes at least as long as it does for 3 gallons, maybe longer. But I do get it below 90 degrees, and I transfer it to one of my 1-gallon Fur Monster carboys. From there, I put it into the fermentation fridge and get it down to pitching temperature of 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and I pitch a small starter of Y yeast 1056 yeast that I had done the night before. I take a starting gravity reading from the wort that's left in the foundry after the transfer. My goal is 1.057, and my result is 1.057. So most of this profile is right, except for that pre-boil volume. That's something I'm going to have to work on, obviously. The only thing left to do is clean up, and when I'm done completely cleaning up, I stop the timer and see that this entire process took 4 hours and 14 minutes. Now, one note about cleaning. I did clean probably as slow as I humanly could. Again, this is a day I had nothing to do. So I was a little slow on getting things together. I could probably tighten up the cleaning regimen to about 30 minutes and get this process under 4 hours. But there's one important thing I need to find out before I decide whether I'm ever going to do this again, and that is to find out how the beer came out. So I did let it ferment for about 8 days, cold pressed it for 2, transferred it into a 1-gallon keg, and then carbonated it. And now we are up to the point of tasting. All right, right, it is the figurative moment of truth. Was that 4+ hours of work worth it for just a little bit of beer? So I did pour a glass, as you saw, and so far so good. I like the color. The color's a little darker than you might expect for a pale ale. That is from that 70-80L caramel malt. I do like to add just a little touch of a higher Lovabond caramel malt in my pale ales to give a little bit of something to go with the hops. So for competition, I might not do that. I might just take that out and put in some 10 or 15, maybe a little bit more of the 20. But for my personal taste for this experiment, this is what I wanted. It's hazy. Well, I guess that's technically not hazy. It's not clear either. And I didn't do any finings. I didn't expect this to be clear, so that's not a surprise. Head retention is not bad. It is not bad. I have a terrible time showing this on the camera. It's been a while since I poured this. I did top it off after the initial footage I took, and it's been a couple minutes since then. It's still got a head on it. Not huge, but the color is very white. It's very creamy. Has some medium bubbles floating around in it, but otherwise very good. Now let's check out the aroma, which should be coming mostly from those Vic Secret hops. And immediately there's that distinct hop aroma that is accompanied by definitely some kind of citrus. It's like a cross between orange and grapefruit. It's really not either. Getting a touch of like a resiny pine, but not overwhelming. And just a little hint of a bit of floral, but not grassy, kind of wildflower-ish. Not rose or not a specific flower, just kind of like and not a perfumey, just a natural floral aroma. So, all right, let's get to the important part to me, and that's tasting after all that work. Yeah, okay. I'm liking the Vic Secret hop. So right off the bat, without getting into the characters of the hops, because it's more of a test of how does a 1 gallon batch come out. This is it's well made in the sense of comparison to my other beers. It's as attenuated. The body is what I expected. Everything, the things that I wanted to achieve in this beer are here, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Color, taste, aroma, body. It's definitely not thin at all, and it's not too full-bodied considering the amount of water to grain ratio and the change we had to make in the water. I'd say that particular part of this test is what I was hoping for, and I don't know if expecting is the right word, but I think that part is successful. Now, let's see what the beer tastes like. Does that a little amount draw out the hops the way it should, which is kind of the point of doing this, one of the points of the style of doing the pale ale. It's very hop forward. There's no mistaking the hop forwardness in it. It's got that nice bitter backbone from the Magnum and a bit of a contribution from all the hops. The hop taste is really pleasant. I really like that Vic Secret. It kind of reminds me of what Galaxy brings in kind of similar versions I've done with Galaxy. Nice herbalness to it, nice earthiness to it. Very, the citrus is much sweeter than the aroma. It's more towards like a clementine tangerine, but it's nice. It's not cloyingly sweet. It's a natural sweet. I like that as well. The bitter and the sweet and the little just hint of caramel from the malt, which I get too, particularly on the finish, is really nice. I'm going to do some more of Vic Secret in the future. And take another taste, see if there's anything a little more complex. Nothing complex in terms of any more taste, but I am going to say I've noticed it's very easy drinking. It's very crushable. I calculated it out at about 7%, but I did have to take a carbonated sample because I forgot to take a finishing reading after the fermentation was done. So I think that might be a little high. I think that is a false number. So it tastes more like somewhere in the 6% range, mid sixes, and it's incredibly crushable, which I'm not sure if I said that before or not, but that's been on my mind as I'm sipping this. It's really good. But the point of this video, although it's a good recipe, I would actually highly suggest it. The point of this video was, could I do it? And I did. I mean, I have 1 gallon of beer. It's very good. There's nothing process wrong with it, but it's almost unavoidable to discuss Was it worth it? And should I do it again? And I do have some notes about that. So I'm going to be reading from paper here because I actually have quite a few things I do differently that I wanted to discuss. First, I think this process took longer than my old process, which was using the cooler and the boil in a bag in a mashing for the mashing step. I don't know it did because I never timed that. I always just had done it. And I used to do it after work. And by the time I'd get home and work and settled, it'd be 7 o'clock. And I know I wasn't up till 11:30 doing this. So I think the other method is shorter. But having said that, there's some things I can certainly shorten in this process. First of all, the cooling. I actually am one of the people I think that don't mind the cooling coil, the immersion chiller that came with the Foundry. I find it works just fine as long as you have continuing to stir and have a cooler water than what's in the wort going. I can get that down to transfer temperature in 15-20 minutes, except for this 1 gallon batch. It took longer than that. I said as I was putting those videos together that I think it took as long, maybe longer. I am positive it took longer now going back and revisiting that day. So that has to be changed. And I've been considering getting the Jaded Brewing, I think it's pronounced Skilla, the CSYLLA for my Foundry anyway. That would be a huge help in reducing the time of a 1 gallon batch. It'd be a huge help in the entire brewing process of the Foundry, honestly. When it comes to cleaning, I'm not even going to say it felt like there was more to clean. There was more to clean. In the old process, I'd have to rinse out the bag, wash out the mash tun, wash out the boil kettle. And that's roughly it, except for spoons and utensils that I use during the process. Using the recirculation plate or the system alone in the Foundry is hoses, the pumps, the plate. There's just more to clean in this. And there's not much I can do to reduce that time. I cleaned everything I possibly could until it was done. Got it down to the Foundry. But maybe not, it's not even a time factor. This is definitely more labor intensive. So that is, if I was doing a pro and con list, that I think would be a con, especially if I wanted to do this really quick at night after work. But a big positive, and in a sense, in a pro, if you want to start making lists, is that the temperature control was great. I rarely hit the exact mash temperature I wanted with the cooler system. I would do the calculations of the grain, the temperature of the grain, and the increase in the water, and I'd always be high or low 1 or 2 degrees. Not disastrous amount of degrees, but enough that I was like, I really wanted to try to mash this in at, let's say, 152, and I'm at 154. I always relied on the Foundry giving me the exact temperature I wanted. And in this case, even with 1 gallon, was true as well. So ultimately, I don't know which one I prefer. What I'm going to have to do is go make another 1 gallon batch with my old system, time it, and kind of note how labor intensive it is compared to the Foundry. Obviously, the pump factor, nothing's going to change, but I can clean that while I'm boiling, so it's not a time factor. I think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to go back, and in fact, I know I am. I'm planning to already. I'm going to do a 1 gallon batch on my old system, make notes, and start listing pros and cons for a future video. But until then, I've got a beer I'm enjoying, and I've actually been thinking about this beer during that wrap up that I just want to taste it again. And I think this is one I am going to be the sole enjoyer of. I'm not going to bother canning or bottling of it and wasting beer in lines. I have probably a good 4 or 5 pint pour left, and I'm just going to enjoy that the rest of this holiday season. So that is it for this episode. I think this will end up being a little longer than usual, so thanks for hanging in there. But it was a fun experiment to try, especially on a day where I really didn't have to worry about how much time I was spending in this. And it's actually pretty cool to know if I wanted to do a 1 gallon batch with some precision with temperatures and water and other things, that option's there. I need to find out how it compares to my old method, and if it's that much more labor intensive, will it become a usual thing? Because I do intend, if we do have a competition season for 2021, I will be making 1 gallon batches. 1 gallon batches have been incredibly successful for me in terms of competitions. In fact, my first 5 medals of my competition, whatever you want to call it, tenure, has been from 1 gallon batches, because I can dial in those unusual styles that I don't necessarily want to drink another, at the time, 4 gallons of, now a gallon and a half of. So I will be doing some additional 1 gallon batches in the future. On what system, that is yet to be decided. So with that, let me say one more time, thank you for watching. Happy holidays, everybody. And I will see you in that next video.